So imagine I asked you, why do we build developmental systems? Not artist development, any developmental system. Why did we build medical schools? Why did we build sporting institutes? Why did we build research universities? What about entrepreneurial incubators? Was it because extraordinary people didn't exist before them? Of course not. Great surgeons existed long before medical schools. Great athletes existed long before sporting institutes. Great scientists existed long before research universities. Developmental systems don't create exceptional human beings. They create the conditions in which exceptional human beings are less likely to be lost. They don't guarantee greatness. Nothing can. But they dramatically increase the likelihood that exceptional human potential will be recognised, supported, and developed. That's why we build them. Not because every child becomes an Olympian, not because every medical student becomes a surgeon, not because every entrepreneur builds the next billion-dollar company. We build them because when exceptional human potential appears, we've decided it deserves the best possible opportunity to become what it's capable of becoming. Now, here's the question that changed everything for me. If that's why developmental systems exist, why have we never built one for artists? I don't think this happened because society decided artists weren't important. In fact, I think the opposite is true. We love artists. We quote them. We sing their songs. We hang their paintings on our walls. We watch their films. We tell our children their stories. Artists help us celebrate. They help us grieve. They help us make sense of ourselves. Their contribution has never been in question. So why wasn't the system built? I think the answer is surprisingly simple. We've spent centuries building systems around artistic products, around concerts, albums, theatre companies, publishing, film, galleries, streaming platforms, competitions, funding, copyright, distribution. We've built remarkable systems for art, but almost none for the long-term development of the artist. And maybe that's because we've never really separated the two. We've assumed that if great art exists, then artist development must somehow already be happening. But those are completely different questions. Great art can exist without a developmental system. History proves that. The real question is, how many extraordinary artists never reached us because a system wasn't there? We'll never know their names. That's the hardest part. Developmental systems aren't built for the people who succeeded. They're built for the people history never got to meet. That's the difference. Developmental systems aren't judged by the exceptional people who survived without them. They're judged by how many exceptional people they stop losing. Think about that for a moment. If Australia wins an Olympic gold medal, we celebrate the athlete. But we also recognise the coaches, the institutes, the pathway, the decades of investment that made that moment possible. When a surgeon performs a life-saving operation, we don't say, well, they figured it out on their own. We recognise the university, the hospital, the mentors, the residency, the entire developmental architecture behind that single moment. But when an artist changes the world, we almost always tell a different story. We celebrate the individual, the genius, the struggle, the luck, the breakthrough. Rarely do we ask, what system helped make that possible? And perhaps even more importantly, what system wasn't there for everyone else? I started looking for that system, not in Australia, everywhere. I assumed someone must have built it, somewhere. Surely somebody had already asked this question. Surely somewhere in the world there was an accepted developmental pathway for artists. A shared language, maybe? Recognised stages? Continuity across a lifetime? The equivalent of medicine, or elite sport, or science. But the more I searched, the more I realised I wasn't finding a hidden system. I was finding the absence of one. Now, that's not to say remarkable development isn't already happening. It is. There are extraordinary schools, exceptional mentors, outstanding programs, places where artists flourish. The Brit School in the UK is a great example. It has helped nurture some extraordinary artists. And around the world, there are countless teachers, mentors, and organisations quietly changing lives every day. I've been fortunate enough to work alongside many of them. But here's what I began to notice. Their success wasn't usually the result of belonging to a larger developmental system. It was often the result of exceptional people creating exceptional environments, the right mentor, the right environment, the right opportunity at the right time. And when those people moved on, or the funding changed, or the program ended, too often the continuity ended with them. That's the difference between a great program and a developmental system. A great program can change lives. There's no doubt about that. A developmental system ensures those opportunities don't depend on luck. Unfortunately, luck has become one of the defining characteristics of artist development. Where you're born, who your teacher is, whether you meet the right mentor, whether someone opens a door at exactly the right moment, whether you can afford to keep going, whether life gives you enough space to keep becoming who you're capable of becoming. Imagine if we accepted that in medicine, or elite sport, or science. We just wouldn't. We would call it a system that needs to be improved. So why have we accepted that for artists? When a developmental system doesn't exist, development doesn't stop. It becomes fragmented. One environment does its part, then lets go. Another picks up the baton, if the artist is lucky. Then another, each one doing valuable work, but rarely connected to the next. It's a relay race, where nobody knows who's holding the baton. That's why so many people describe artist development as confusing, not because artists are confused, because the pathway is. Every teacher is trying to help, every mentor is trying to help, every organisation is trying to help, but they're often working in isolation, without a shared language, without a shared understanding of where an artist is developmentally, without a shared vision of what comes next. Imagine if medicine worked like that. Imagine if every hospital invented its own version of anatomy, its own language, its own pathway, its own understanding of what a surgeon should become. It would be chaos, not because the people weren't committed, because they weren't connected. I think that's where we've found ourselves in the arts. We don't lack passionate people. We don't lack extraordinary educators. We don't lack remarkable mentors. We don't even lack opportunities. What we've lacked is continuity between them. And I don't think we've fully appreciated just how important continuity really is. Because every mature developmental system protects it. Not talent, not opportunity, continuity. Think about medicine. A medical student doesn't have to rediscover what it means to become a doctor every few years. Their mentors change, their hospitals change, their responsibilities change, but the developmental journey continues. The same is true in elite sports. A young gymnast might work with different coaches over 20 years, different facilities, different competitions, different expectations, but they're all connected by the same developmental pathway. The continuity isn't in the coach. It's in the system. Now think about artists. An artist leaves school and suddenly everything changes. A new language, new expectations, new mentors, new measures of success, almost as if they've become a different person overnight. Then they release music, everything changes again. Then they sign a deal, everything changes again. Then they become independent. Everything changes again. They're constantly rebuilding instead of continuing. And then I ask myself, what would continuity actually feel like? Maybe a young songwriter leaves school, they don't feel like they have to start again, they simply just move on to the next stage. Their mentor might change, their developmental journey doesn't. How about a performer finishes university, nobody says just good luck. Instead they say, here's what usually comes next. What about an artist becoming a parent? The pathway doesn't disappear, it adapts. An artist takes 5 years away. They don't come back feeling like they've failed. They come back knowing where they are and how to continue. How about an artist at 60 still belongs to the same developmental journey as an artist at 16? They're simply at different points on the same lifelong pathway. And that's when I realised continuity isn't about staying in the same place. It's about never having to start from zero. That's what mature developmental systems protect, not talent, continuity. Because continuity allows talent to become capability. Capability to become confidence. Confidence to become contribution. And that's the point where I realised I wasn't really looking at an industry problem. I was looking at a developmental problem, a problem that no amount of marketing, funding, or commercial success could solve on its own. Because those things are designed to grow careers. I was trying to understand how to grow human beings. So I often wonder what the arts might look like if continuity became normal. What if every young artist knew not exactly where they would end up, but where they were in their development? What if parents understood that artist development wasn't a gamble, but a recognised developmental journey? What if schools, universities, mentors, industry, and governments all saw themselves not as separate parts, but as contributors to the same lifelong pathway? Imagine how different the conversation would become. Instead of asking, are they talented enough? We might ask, what do they need next? Instead of wondering, will they make it? We might ask, how do we help them keep developing? Instead of celebrating only the people who survived, we might begin celebrating the systems that helped them flourish. And perhaps the biggest change of all is that we'd stop thinking of artist development as something that belongs to the music industry or the theatre industry or the visual arts. We'd begin recognising it for what I believe it really is, a specialised form of human development. Because that's what this journey changed for me. I didn't set out to build a system. I set out to answer a question, but the deeper I looked, the more I realised the missing piece was never talent. It was never creativity. It was never passion. It was continuity. And maybe that's why artists have so often been described as lucky. Lucky to meet the right mentor, lucky to find the right school, lucky to get discovered, lucky to survive. But perhaps it was never really luck. Perhaps what we've been calling luck was simply the accidental presence of the conditions that great developmental systems create intentionally. And if that's true, then maybe the next chapter for the arts isn't finding more talented people. It isn't creating more opportunities. It isn't asking artists to become more resilient. Maybe it's finally deciding that this form of human excellence deserves the same developmental architecture we've already built for so many others. Maybe.